Hello viewers. So a bit of Formula One chat at the end of the Formula One season. I'm not going to review the whole season here on this conversation. I might do another day. Probably wouldn't get enough views to be worth it, but I would can share my thoughts from time to time. But we've had the Formula One at the weekend. Everybody was watching it, and it's been the end of quite a long, somewhat stressful season. And the battle between Lewis Hamilton and Max Verstappen has been fierce. One of the toughest battles we've seen between drivers, but it had a negative edge, I felt, since Silverstone, and everything since then has gone, everybody in their sort of partisan crowds of how they see things either side, and then you have the neutral Formula One fans like myself just watching it and quite frankly finding it all quite funny. I watched the Abu Dhabi race this weekend with some excitement, looking forward to it, seeing the action, the drama lined up as these two have come together, and there was a real atmosphere about it, an occasion. People talked about these occasions. I guess we've had them in the past. Hill and Schumacher and Hakkinen and Schumacher, and there have been races where it's come down to the final race, but obviously neck and neck on points, it's all to play for. And the performance of the Mercedes since Brazil has been on another level. No one's going to beat that car, so it was always going to be an uphill struggle for any team to compete with that Mercedes. It really is bullet quick. Now, we've had some controversy, haven't we, these last few races with the stewarding of Grand Prix races, and it's fair comment. The stewarding is inconsistent. It's lacking some transparency. If I was to take an area that frustrates me on a regular basis, it's the white lines. Now, this isn't just Michael Massey, and this issue was creeping in Charlie Whiting's reign a few years ago with Austria, and they were saying you can go over the curb here or go off there, and no, you have white lines. That's it. That's the rule. End of story. Sorts it out. There are technology options available that they've chosen not to use so far, and I don't really understand the reasoning behind that. There is technology. Solutions can be found, and they need to be found, because it is one of the biggest issues with cars running off the road and getting an advantage. These tarmac runoffs are all good in terms of safety, but they're not just about safety. They're about keeping cars in the race, and in some cases, at some circuits, they're about rich people who can't drive testing their Lamborghinis and Ferraris and not binning them in the kitty litter every 5 minutes. So looking at the race then, there are two contentious issues in terms of the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix this weekend that stand out. You had obviously the lap 1 where Lewis cut across the chicane and continued on, and you had the issue with a safety car at the end. Now, I've been listening to a lot of feedback and YouTube spaces, Twitter spaces, and getting involved in the chat, and it's been great to hear all the feedback from everybody in terms of what they would like to see, the changes they would like to see, the anger. But I'm going to talk about that in just a moment. First, let's talk about the lap 1 incident. That for me was just a clear give the place back. If I was watching that and I saw it happen, I'd just say give the place back. Let's think about it, what happened just from a driver's perspective. I know it's a lungy pass, but when somebody does a lungy pass on you, what do? You try to undercut them in the corner is what you do. You brake actually a little bit earlier, hope they go wide, you get a tighter line in, they get a compromised exit, and you hope you get some speed down the next straight. Or you brake late, knowing that they're going to brake late, knowing you can run across the gap that's there and maintain position, and then your team can fight for that. So that's kind of the mindset that you go into that corner. That's the mindset that Lewis went in there with, and he got away with it. Simple as that. For me, it was, that was just one of those decisions shouldn't have been. It's quite simple. Give the place back. End of story. He had a driving opportunity to avoid all that. As I say, keep in the corner. He chose not to. Cut across. That's fine. Give the place back. If that had been gravel, he wouldn't have handled it that way. It would all have been a little bit different. So if you do want to see a lunge, take a look at Yuki Tsunoda on the final lap. Now, that was quite lungy. Wow, pretty close as well. But anyway, I digress. So that was one issue of inconsistency they need to look at, along with the white lines on different circuits and a few odd calls. I've seen some odd calls over the years. I remember Max Verstappen pushing Charles Leclerc off at the hairpin on Red Bull Ring a couple of years ago, and saying that's not right. That's not right. You know, they were side by side, and he just drove him off the road. And then it was said, no, it's acceptable when a car is late apexing. You're allowed to just drive somebody off the road. I don't understand where that comes into racing. If you look at some of the greatest racing moves ever, it will always involve wheel to wheel, cars giving each other the minimum space they can. That's great racing. Bumping into somebody, driving people off, it's not great racing. It's bad sportsmanship, and it needs to be dealt with. It's not being dealt with. There's nobody strong enough in the stewarding to actually deal with it and get a hold on this situation. It's quite strange. It's how we've ended up where we have in terms of the various instances over time. But the stewarding has left us in a bit of a confused mess. If you take Brazil for a moment, and I digress away from the Abu Dhabi, but it's important. If you look at Brazil, there was a big deal made out of Max driving Lewis off the road there. Big deal on Twitter from people. I say a big deal because actually it was a non-event. Two cars didn't touch, went off the track, rejoined. Car in second place passes, takes the lead, goes on. No harm done, no effect to anybody. So the actual consequence of it was nothing. But then fans were gunning for a penalty. What penalty are you going to give? 5 seconds. How can you give a 5-second penalty when a year earlier Lewis Hamilton took out Alex Albon and got a 5-second penalty? About, it must have been a couple of hours after the race finished, something like that. Carlos Sainz had to have his podium in the middle of the dark at night. It was ridiculous. You can't just have the same thing. Now, consequence. Fans will say, oh, it's not down to consequence, it's just down to rules. And there we are. There we have the problem. Consequence is a part of the issue. Consequence cannot be ignored. And this is where the rules have lost their way. Where a driver would have had contact years ago and got a drive-through penalty or 10-second stop drive-through penalty, which they should have had. Now they're getting away with this 5-second penalty for taking another car out, taking another car off. I look now and I think that's where it started going wrong. And then you back yourself into a gap where now you have these drivers taking each other off, if you like, mucking around, fun and games, gamesmanship. And it's where the gamekeeper has lost his way, and so the play changes, if you like. The field of play changes for those competing. They are pushing the envelope of the rules. Saw it a bit with Fernando Alonso, didn't we, at the Russian Grand Prix. Had a little practice, went off, used the rejoin. It needs a rule. Generally, these things don't need a rule. Max driving Lewis off doesn't need a rule. Lewis being slow to the grid behind Max doesn't need a rule. It needs a conversation. It needs a conversation. It needs a chat between people to get into a room together and sort things out. I don't believe everything in the world needs a rule, but I do think that there's, in terms of gentlemanly conduct, we seem to have lost that, and we seem to have lost respect. I spoke to a chap who worked at Silverstone years ago, and he was talking about Formula One many years ago when he was younger, working at Silverstone. He was an older chap now, in his late 60s, and he said to me, Graham Hill was here and another famous driver, and the other famous driver couldn't go out in the car. So Graham Hill said, look, I'll jump into your car, rival team, and get it set up for you. And he did. He jumped in, set it up, and the guy had a great race car. Can you imagine that level of respect between teams and drivers today? I mean, it's that level of respect, the respect even of the danger, has gone. And it's a bit of a shame, and I think that needs to be re-established. So you do need a human element in this, whether people agree with it or not. We are human, we have emotions, and everybody needs to discuss things in different ways. But we have seen a number of rules broken, changed, twisted. We've seen the waters muddied this year in how rulings are given, such as the brake testing, which combine two separate elements, in fact, in terms of the ruling from the FIA. The one which is the actions of the Max Verstappen in his braking technique, and one with Mercedes of Lewis Hamilton and how he responded to the strategic overtaking. Both teams making strategic overtakes. It needed two separate looks to decide what was going on there. That's a whole different conversation I'm not going to go into now, but it muddied the waters. Lots of things have muddied the waters this year. If you're watching this and thinking, oh, well, it's just this year, it's just the conspiracy theories of 2021, I would say think again. There's always been odd things that have happened in Formula One. I remember standing in the soaking rain for 9 hours in the Silverstone Grand Prix in 1998, seeing Michael Schumacher win from the pit lane. He took his 10-second penalty, didn't even make it to the end of the pit lane to rejoin the racetrack, and won the race because he drove past the start-finishing line in the pit lane. It made a mockery of the rules. The penalty should have been taken laps earlier. It was ridiculous. And as a fan standing at the racetrack, I just thought it was shocking at the time. How can Formula One allow this to happen? Silly decisions, they come up. Exploits in the rules, they come up. These things happen time and time again. Is there a repair for that rule? Did they ever fix that? I've no idea. These things do happen. Take pitting under the safety car. For a while it was banned. They made a big deal about it being banned, and then they reintroduced it. Didn't even talk to anybody about it. It was just reintroduced. Not a word. I remember saying, oh, they're pitting under the safety car again. There we are then. Literally not a mention in terms of, from a fan perspective. So these things happen. So, as I was mentioning, the Brazil incident was kind of blown out of proportion, really. Drivers drive each other off the track all the time. They come back on, they have a word, they sort it out. And as I say, from a penalty perspective, well, you can't give a 5-second penalty because precedent has been set that you can take someone out for 5 seconds. So if you're going to get a 5-second penalty, you may as well knock somebody off the track entirely. What a ridiculous situation we find ourselves in. Going through the race, and I'm not going to discuss the race bit by bit, but just going through the race, obviously Lewis's lead in those last few laps was insurmountable. Okay, Max had no answer to it. The speed of that Mercedes was fantastic. Wow, what a car Mercedes have built again this year. 8 years on the trot, and they've built a hell of a machine. This is where we get to an interesting point in Formula One, where people say to me, "Oh, it's a show now. It's a show. It's just made for Netflix. It's a show. It's a show." Well, it's always been a show. Why does anyone think Mercedes joined the sport? What, you think they joined the sport to be part of a sport? They came in 2010. They said, we'll join Formula One if we can bring in our hybrid engine technology to make it relevant to road cars. Mercedes' hybrid engine technology was known to be leagues beyond anybody else's. The rules were literally changed to bring Mercedes into it. I was actually at the presentation at McLaren in 2010 when they was discussing leaving Mercedes, and whatever they were going to do for the future wasn't entirely clear at the time, but it was already clear the rules were being changed to bring Mercedes back in the sport. So Mercedes agreed to come into the sport as the rules were for a few years to develop their factory, develop their cars, and get their structures in place ready for the 2014 season. There was no mystery when Lewis went to Mercedes. It's quite strange how I see this mentioned all the time, and yet it seemed quite clear to myself and other people in Formula One that Mercedes were going to dominate. So for me, the sport took a back seat in terms of the branding and the marketing that would go into Formula One at that point. And since then, we've seen 8 years of commercial branding domination. There's not really been any answer to it from a sporting perspective. From a sporting perspective, we've seen drivers wasting their careers. And I think for the last 2 years, and obviously you've been aware of the DAS system existing, I think it's fair to say that Valtteri Bottas was second in the championship. And quite frankly, no one else had a chance. There wasn't even anyone for Lewis to race. They just didn't have a chance. This year he had one competitor, and that was Max. And in this final race, the car was working well, and he was well ahead of Max. So at this point, people watching get frustrated because they say to me, oh, and how can you say that it's about one car? It's always been about the best car. To an extent it has, but it's also been about the teams and how they've worked and their strategies, reliability. All of that is gone now. These cars are so bulletproof reliable, but also a driver brings less to a car now than ever before. You speak to a mechanic, you speak to anybody in Formula One, the purity of driving is going bit by bit by bit as computers take up more and more and more. It's a different sport now. It's a different show. So when people say it's a show, yes, it's a show. It's been a show for quite a few years, and Mercedes and their drivers have benefited immensely from that show, it has to be said. So we get to the safety car incident. Okay, everyone's, again, it's all this madness about safety car and robbing Lewis and all this sort of stuff. And I thought, well, let's have a look at what Jolyon Palmer had to say. Jolyon Palmer looked at the breakdown of the incident to see what occurred, to see what was right and wrong that took place there. So when I looked at it, you had the crash from Latifi, understandable. He had some dirt on his tyres, may have had some damage to his car, got on the power, hard racing, did the identical accident to Kimi Räikkönen in practice. And yeah, that's it. You need safety car on, you need to get rid of that car. They didn't need a red flag. I don't know why people are asking for a red flag. You didn't need a red flag because there was a digger there ready to take it away in 2 laps, 3 laps. It was easily gone. They got rid of the car, I believe, in just 2 laps. The car was gone, and the sweep up was taking a little bit longer. Could have been coordinated better. But the real problem came in the letting the cars through. The message came through initially not to let cars through. I remember watching the race and thinking, well, why is that? That's very strange. I've not heard this before. It's not let the cars through. Commonly, we would always let the cars through before restarting. Then moments later, the message came through to let some of the cars through, which was very strange. Why would you let some of the cars through? Very odd. When you look at the data on the cleanup, they had about a minute where the safety car could have gone a bit slower and they could have simply got everybody through. I don't know why they didn't. It seemed to be a very strange situation. Had they got everybody through, I think, wow, we would have had a very action-packed last few minutes of the race. And if you look at the race, obviously Max was on soft tyres. Yuki Tsunoda was on fresh tyres. I mean, it was all action in the field. Yuki Tsunoda, if you haven't seen his lap, do check it out. It is a monster. If I have a link, I'll put it below the video. It is a monster of a lap. And wow, as I mentioned earlier before, a very late overtaking of Valtteri Bottas. Very impressive there. So we come to the whole section with the cars passing, and that's a bit confusing. We'll come back to that in a moment. The next thing really is, do you pit or don't you? I've seen people online saying, oh, well, Lewis could have pitted. And I say, yes, he could have pitted. There were risks that he would have encountered. Let's have a think about those risks for a second. Lewis is quite a long way ahead, so judging by what I'd seen, if he was very quickly past the crash and he missed the first opportunity to pit. But if he did pit initially and he'd driven straight into the pits, the pit crew might not have been ready, but he would have got onto soft tyres and he would have probably been in second place. I think it's highly likely he would have been second. Perez was a long way away, so second place. But let's say, for argument's sake, he was third and that Max and Perez didn't pit on their worn tyres. He would have been third and he would have had a very fine chance of passing both cars very quickly. Let's say he was second, which is more than likely. He would have had a very good chance of passing Max very quickly. The car was super quick, and on soft tyres it would have been super easy for him to pass, drive around Max for that kind of power. But they didn't pit. Why didn't they pit? Well, another reason is that they would not only have lost track position, but it's quite possible the race could have ended behind the safety car. And I have to admit, when I first saw the cars going around, I thought to myself, well, could end under a safety car here. That would be a kind of rubbish ending, but it is what it is. But we didn't need to end under a safety car. The car had been cleared away, as you could see on the final lap, lap and a half. The car was gone. We can go racing. Why can't we? So the option was that option where Mercedes calculated there'd be a safety car to the end was a miscalculation on their front. Why the cars weren't let by, why only half the cars were let by, is the issue. Well, for Lewis and Max up the front, there wasn't an issue. They actually started as they should. Nothing got in the way. The technicality of the cars behind them was the issue. So in fact, it was Carlos Sainz and Yuki Tsunoda that probably encountered the biggest problems with the cars in the way. They encountered the issues. They were the ones who were let down. Lewis and Max actually had a fair start. This is the crazy thing. If all the cars had passed, in fact, I think it's highly likely that Yuki Tsunoda may have even got into second place. It's not impossible if you look at his incredible speed on that lap, quite frankly. I don't know where he found it, but it was a super lap. And he was closing on Carlos as well on the next straight. And that was after having passed a couple of back runners along the way. So he had amazing speed. And so in a way, the whole situation helped Max and Lewis in that way. I don't think Carlos had the speed to get involved in them. I don't know if Carlos would have bothered. I don't think Yuki Tsunoda would have got in the way of Max because of their relationship with Red Bull. But I tell you, it would have been interesting to have seen. So what we're talking about is we're talking about a bunch of lapped cars that had no effect on the final race section whatsoever. Literally no effect. And it reminded me a lot of the Brazil argument. Oh, Max this, Max that, Max the other. I'm sitting here thinking, well, there wasn't even an effect on the racing. I mean, they literally went off and then he got the place anyway, which is probably what he should have been told to have done, was give the place to Lewis. Having said that, Lewis went off the track as well. I think if Lewis stayed on the track in Brazil, it would have been different, which even nullifies the event entirely. It really was blown out of all proportion. And it's the same with this event. At the end of the day, Mercedes made a gamble. We're going to gamble that the race is going to end under a safety car because they missed their opportunity to pit. And unfortunately, they took the consequences, and that's it. As I say, it seems like it's manipulated, but sometimes it's lack of communication. Sometimes it may even be some poor decision making from why didn't we let all the back running cars through in the first place. If they'd let them all through, it would have made no difference. Like I say, Lewis may have been third or even fourth, and then maybe everybody would be happy. But as it is, there was a technicality further down the order, and it's one of those things. Now, the funny thing is, when you go online and you talk to people about it, they're so partisan and set in their ways that they can't see it any other way. It's funny, you talk to me and you say to me, am I invested in a driver? Actually, I'm not invested in a driver. But I do feel that Fernando Alonso is one of the greatest drivers there's ever been in Formula One. Watching him all these years and all of his racing, I'm always amazed at how he uses the car, the absolute control and the process he has looking at what's actually going on around him. It's a joy to watch him race, and I would love to see him in a great car. This year, Lewis has got what he sees as his maximum out of Mercedes. It's very hard to tell, isn't it? When you have Valtteri Bottas, who's such a yo-yo in terms of performance, what is going on at Mercedes? And as for Max, again, it looks like he's really got the maximum out of his car, honestly, this year. I mean, he uses all the track. You can see how much he's putting through the car. It's been a consistent performance in every race. When we take it to this final section, and there are decisions made behind the safety car, it can go either way. Now, let's talk about red flags for a second. I keep hearing people say red flag. Well, it wasn't a red flag incident. Didn't need a red flag. Cleared the car, got the race underway again. So we didn't need a red flag. If we do have red flags, they do need to investigate the rules behind changing tyres. And there's got to be a rule where you get a penalty of some kind. So if you change tyres, whether it's a 5, 10, 15 back of the grid place penalty for changing your tyres in a red flag, that's got to be brought in. Otherwise, it neutralises the entire race, as we saw when Jenson Button could have won Monaco years ago, and then they red flagged it and everybody changed their tyres and it just neutralised the race. We can't take strategy out. We could remove tyre changes under the virtual safety car and safety car, but then part of the strategy of the engineers is preparing for a safety car, that the eventuality may happen. Sometimes that can turn a race around. Sometimes we need that. I often like the safety car bunching everybody up and turning strategies on their heads. I like that. I think Formula One always needs that element of things that can happen. Motorsport always does, well, not just Formula One, motorsport in general. I don't think you can do away with the way the safety car works and red flag every single time. And finally, back runners. Should back runners be allowed to overtake? Well, I think they should be allowed to overtake, because if you have an incident on the first lap your race is effectively over. But if you hang in there and you keep driving, then there's a chance that you can fight your way back into the race if there's a chance to one lap yourself. I think you always need that as a racing driver, that opportunity. Otherwise, we're just going to have guys have a technical problem on the first lap, get lapped, and then that's it. They're just drones going round and round the track. It's no good. We need to keep that racing option in there, even for those at the back. Their races are just as important for them as the races are for the guys at the front. So I think there are opportunities to look at things. I personally think that the blue flags need to be looked at. If, for example, you said, right, we're not going to let lap cars overtake during the safety car, or they alter the process in that, I would say do away with blue flags entirely. I mean, I'd happily see blue flags gone. When you're in a car as fast as the front running cars, you can just plough through the field. It's no problem. I want those drivers to race for it. I've watched some very exciting races in IndyCar where drivers have got stuck behind cars that are lapping, and it's bunched everybody up and made some great action. I would like to see that in Formula One. You know, I mean, let's face it, the Red Bull and the Mercedes are so much faster than everybody else. Why wouldn't we have something like that? Let's just get an option like that. Get a bit of racing in there. Give an option to the back runners as well. Show what they can do. So there are plenty of things we can do to change the rules in the future in some way. You know, I walk away from the 2021, and I would say it's been a fun season that's been it's had a strange ending to it. The rule with the cars behind the safety car, which Mercedes can sue if they want to. I'd say from a personal standpoint that would seem to be ill-advised to me, because there are consequences that are unpredictable, and that could end badly for everyone, including Mercedes. So, and you have to say, what are you going to do? What's the outcome going to be? It all gets very messy. If Mercedes had done the pit stop, there wouldn't have been a problem. They'd have had soft tyres and won the race. So it was a racing strategic issue, and they're having a problem with cars that weren't even interacting with them in that way. So it's, or at least with Lewis and Verstappen. So it's certainly a conversation for them to resolve in terms of how this is handled. I think from a F1 stewarding perspective, it's a bit of a mess all year. There's a lack of decisiveness in terms of the stewarding. I've got ideas on who I would like to see as a steward at Formula One. People with great experience I'd love to see there, and quick minds that can make those decisions straight away. And there are people there in Formula One that can do that, and they're not being noticed, they're not being acknowledged right now. Certainly something for the future. But I hope I've given you something to think about. Now, I know that when I finish this video that the Lewis fans are just going to be angry, and they're going to say no, no, no. And the Max fans, well, the Max fans will say whatever Max fans will say, but the Lewis fans will generally disagree, because I've seen online that no matter how things get said, that they see it only one way, and that race should be cancelled, and that's the end of it, or the last few laps should be cancelled, or whatever. But I look at it and I say, well, whatever has to be said about the FIA, Max kept his head down, kept driving the wheels off it, and the Red Bull team made the right strategic call for a pretty regular occurrence. It's a safety car, and every time there's a safety car, you've got to make that decision. And there have been many races won and lost over safety cars over the years, and there's nothing unusual in that. But that's it from me for now, for a bit of Formula One chat. As ever, more soon. Hello viewers, well thanks for watching the video today. Do like and subscribe, it supports what we do. Do become a YouTube member. YouTube Patreon supports all of our content you see on the channel, and of course lots of gaming from retro to modern games. I love it all in terms of racing action. So click on one of the two videos just there to find out more.